Christmas had always been my favorite holiday. For me, it wasn't just about the gifts or the glittering tree. It was about tradition. Every year, my husband and I would host Christmas Eve dinner at his parents' house. His entire family would gather, dressed in their best, the table overflowing with food, laughter echoing from every corner. That year was no different. At least, it didn't seem different. I spent the whole day making sure everything looked perfect. My dress pressed, my hair curled just right, the dessert I had baked arranged carefully on a crystal platter. I wanted things to feel warm and joyful. Maybe I was trying too hard. Deep inside, I had been feeling something was off for months. My husband, Daniel, had been distant. More business trips, more late nights at the office, more secrets in his phone he guarded like a treasure chest. I had my suspicions, but on Christmas Eve, I pushed them aside. Tonight, I told myself, would be about family. The house glowed with twinkling lights. His mother fussed over the turkey, his sisters compared gifts under the tree, the children darted around with sticky fingers and wide eyes. I smiled, played the role of the perfect wife, even though I could feel Daniel watching me with that strange expression he'd worn lately, half smug, half impatient. Halfway through dinner, he slipped away for a moment and returned with a small, red-wrapped box. He held it in his hand like it contained the world. "Everyone," he said loudly, raising his glass, "I have a very special gift tonight, for my wife." The entire room erupted with cheers and teasing laughter. His family loved public displays like this. They leaned in eagerly, expecting jewelry, maybe a romantic surprise. I laughed nervously, though something in my stomach tightened. His smile was too wide, too forced. Daniel placed the box in my hands, the whole family's eyes burning into me. My fingers shook slightly as I untied the ribbon and lifted the lid. Inside, instead of velvet or gold, was a plain white envelope. My breath caught. I opened it slowly, my heart pounding, and slid out the papers inside. Words stared back at me in black and white. For a moment, I couldn't process them. Then it hit me. Divorce papers. The room exploded again, but this time with applause. Applause. His sisters clapped, his cousins whistled, his father laughed like it was the funniest prank he'd ever seen. Someone even shouted, "Best Christmas surprise ever." I sat frozen, the papers trembling in my hands. It wasn't a prank. It wasn't funny. Daniel had chosen Christmas Eve, in front of his entire family, to humiliate me, to blindside me, to rip apart everything I thought we were. My face burned, but I didn't cry. Not then. I forced a smile, closed the envelope, and placed it neatly on the table. He thought he had won in that moment. He thought he had broken me. But what Daniel didn't know was that I had been preparing for this night too. The applause still rang in my ears long after it stopped. I remember sitting there, frozen, my cheeks burning, as if someone had pressed fire against my skin. Around me, Daniel's family kept laughing, raising glasses, patting him on the back, as though he had delivered the greatest performance of the year. But inside, I wasn't laughing. I was calculating. I excused myself quietly, carrying the dessert tray back into the kitchen. My hands were steady, too steady. When betrayal finally sinks in, it doesn't always look like tears. Sometimes it looks like silence. Daniel followed me a few minutes later, smugness dripping from every step. He leaned against the counter, crossing his arms. "Well," he said, "you took that better than I thought. Guess you saw it coming." I looked at him carefully, studying the man I had once loved. His eyes sparkled with triumph, like a hunter who just trapped his prey. But he was wrong. I wasn't trapped. "I did see it coming," I replied softly. "I just didn't know you'd choose Christmas." He shrugged. "It's symbolic. Fresh start. Everyone knows now. Makes it easier." Easier for him, harder for me. That's what he thought. What Daniel didn't know was that 2 months earlier, when his late nights and whispered calls became too suspicious to ignore, I had started my own quiet investigation. I wasn't confrontational, not yet. Instead, I documented everything: screenshots, bank transfers, messages he thought he had deleted. I even hired a private investigator one weekend while he claimed to be networking out of town. And what I found wasn't just an affair. It was worse. He had been funneling money into a separate account, hiding assets, preparing for this divorce long before I ever saw those papers. He thought he'd leave me humiliated, broke and discarded, while he walked away clean with his mistress and a future I had helped build. So when he smirked in that kitchen, when he told me to pack my things after the holidays, I just smiled. For the first time that night, my smile was genuine. "Of course, Daniel," I whispered, "after the holidays." He took that as surrender. He left the kitchen looking victorious, telling his sisters how civilized I was being. The joke was still alive in the dining room, laughter still bouncing off the walls, but none of them knew what I had in store. That night, I didn't sleep. I lay awake, staring at the ceiling, going over every document, every piece of evidence I had stored away. His betrayal had cut deep, but my preparation was sharper. And when the sun rose on Christmas morning, I no longer felt like a victim. I felt like a woman with power. Because Daniel thought he had given me the worst gift of my life. But in truth, he had just given me the perfect stage. By the time the rest of the family had gone to bed, my plan was already in motion. Daniel slept soundly beside me, unaware that the woman lying inches away from him wasn't broken. She was sharpening her knives. The first secret I planned to expose was about money. Not the petty lies about extra work expenses or overtime dinners he had fed me for months. No, this was bigger. Daniel had been building a double life, and it left a paper trail thick enough to choke him. Weeks earlier, I had noticed odd charges in our joint account. Small transfers at first, 200 here, 500 there. He dismissed them as business investments, claiming I wouldn't understand. But I understood enough to know he was moving money. So, I dug deeper. Using the investigator I'd hired, I traced every transfer. That's when I uncovered the offshore account, one Daniel had set up under a shell company name. And guess what? He had been funneling thousands of dollars into it. Money that wasn't just his. Money that belonged to both of us. But it didn't stop there. Some of those funds came directly from his company, the one where he was a senior manager trusted with budgets and client contracts. The investigator confirmed what I already suspected. Daniel was embezzling. He wasn't just hiding assets from me, he was committing fraud. I had every receipt, every screenshot, every bank record neatly compiled in a digital folder. I even backed it up on 3 separate drives, just in case. On Christmas morning, as he sat smugly sipping coffee and scrolling through his phone, I quietly texted myself from an anonymous account. Attached was one of the documents, a bank transfer clearly showing money diverted to his secret account. His phone buzzed on the table, and I watched his face drain of color as he opened it. For the first time in months, I saw fear in his eyes. "What's this?" he stammered, holding up the phone like it might burn him. I sipped my tea calmly. "Merry Christmas, Daniel. That's your first gift." He pushed back his chair, pacing. "Where did you get this? This isn't what it looks like." "Oh, it's exactly what it looks like," I said evenly. "And the best part? I have everything backed up." Daniel had always been a master of control. In arguments, he spoke louder, faster, until I doubted my own memory. In public, he was charming enough to make me look like the paranoid one whenever I hinted that things weren't perfect. But now, for the first time, the mask slipped. His hands shook as he scrolled through the screenshot again, zooming in on the bank transfer. He muttered numbers under his breath, as if double-checking that the account I had found was really his. Then he looked up at me, his eyes wide and desperate. "You don't understand," he said. "This isn't what you think. It's complicated." I set my mug down with deliberate slowness. "It's not complicated, Daniel. You've been stealing. From me. From your company. And now I have proof." He flinched at the word proof. For a man who lived by appearances, the thought of exposure was his nightmare. He tried the guilt tactic first. "You don't want to do this. Think of what it'll do to our family, to my career. You'll ruin everything we built." I almost laughed. Everything we built? What he meant was everything he stole. I leaned forward, my voice low but sharp. "No, Daniel, you ruined it the moment you decided to betray me. I'm just giving you the bill." That's when the bargaining began. He promised me money, vacations, even a new house if I would just delete what I had. "Nobody has to know," he whispered, almost pleading. "We can fix this." But his desperation only fueled me, because I knew he was lying. A man like Daniel didn't beg unless he was cornered, and I had him right where I wanted. "You're not listening," I said firmly. "This isn't about what you can offer me. It's about what happens next." His breathing grew shallow. "Next? What do you mean?" I stood up, letting the silence hang heavy between us. "This was just the first gift. There's more. And if you think you're scared now—" I let my words trail off. "Wait until you see what comes next." I walked past him, leaving him alone with his panic. Behind me, I heard him curse under his breath, pacing like a caged animal. For once, I didn't feel small in his presence. For once, I wasn't the one scrambling to hold things together. Upstairs, I locked myself in the guest room, my new war room. I plugged in the external hard drive and reviewed the files again. There was so much more. Emails, photos, and a second secret far darker than stolen money. The beauty of it all was that Daniel had no idea how much I really knew. He thought the bank account was the extent of it. He didn't realize that was just the beginning. As I closed my laptop, I allowed myself a smile. Tomorrow, I would show him the second gift, and that one would destroy him completely. The first secret had been financial. Cold, calculated, and humiliating for him because it proved he wasn't the flawless provider he pretended to be. But the second secret, that one cut deeper. It wasn't about money. It was about his character, his soul. I didn't stumble onto it by accident. Weeks before Christmas, I had already suspected something. Daniel had been leaving earlier for meetings that never appeared on his calendar. He would come home late, smelling faintly of perfume that wasn't mine. At first, I told myself it was paranoia. That's what women do, right? We gaslight ourselves before anyone else even gets the chance. But then I checked his phone. Not by snooping. He handed it to me once, unlocked, and forgot to take it back. A single notification changed everything. A message from her. Her name was Lila. Younger, ambitious, and apparently convinced Daniel would leave me for her. The messages were sickeningly sweet. "Miss you already. Can't wait for our trip." And the worst one, "When she's gone, it'll finally be just us." When she's gone. The words rang in my head for days. They weren't talking about divorce papers anymore. They were talking about erasing me, rewriting the story of our life together as if I had never existed. So I dug deeper. Screenshots, emails, even a hotel receipt tucked inside his jacket pocket. And what I found wasn't just infidelity. It was manipulation. He had promised Lila things he could never deliver. A new house, a future filled with lies he could never sustain. But here's the part that shook me most. One email thread revealed he'd used our children's college fund to take her on vacations. Money I had fought to save, scrimping on things for myself so they could have opportunities we never did. He had stolen from his own kids for a weekend in Miami. That was the second secret, and it was far more powerful than the first. Because while people could forgive financial mistakes, nobody forgave a father stealing from his own children to fund an affair. I remember the moment I decided how to use it. I printed the emails. Every single one. I slipped them into a neat red envelope, the same kind he had used for the divorce papers. A poetic touch, I thought. The next morning, I placed the envelope on the kitchen counter where I knew he would see it before work. I didn't say a word. I just poured my coffee, kissed the kids on the forehead, and walked out the door. When I came back, the envelope was gone, but Daniel was sitting on the couch, pale and sweating, clutching his head in his hands. He didn't yell this time. He didn't beg. He just looked at me like a man who had already lost everything but didn't know when the final blow would fall. And that was the beauty of it. He had no idea when, or how, I would reveal his betrayal. But he knew it was coming. Daniel thought he could contain it. He always believed he was the smartest man in the room, the one pulling the strings while everyone else danced like puppets. But secrets are like cracks in glass. Once they start, they spread faster than you can stop them. The morning after he found the red envelope, he tried to play it cool. He still put on his expensive suit, knotted his silk tie, and left for work with his usual fake confidence. But I noticed his hands trembling as he grabbed his briefcase. He couldn't even look me in the eye. And that was only the beginning. 2 days later, the first ripple hit. His business partner, Michael, showed up at our door. He didn't even bother with pleasantries. He stormed in, his face red with rage, holding a folder of documents. "Do you know what he's done?" Michael snapped at me. His voice was shaking. I shrugged. "Which part?" Michael slammed the folder down on the kitchen table. Inside were balance sheets, expense reports, and one very damning detail. Daniel had been funneling company funds into miscellaneous travel. Trips with her, company money, not just the college fund. Now his betrayal had spilled into his professional life. Michael turned to me, his voice softer now. "I don't know how much you're aware, but this isn't just about the business. He's risking jail, fraud charges, if the board finds out." He trailed off, shaking his head. I simply poured Michael a glass of water and told him I knew enough. But inside, I felt the smallest flicker of justice. The walls were closing in, and I didn't even have to lift a finger. The second ripple came at home. Our children, our teenagers, smart and far less naive than he assumed, started asking questions. My daughter cornered me one night in the kitchen. "Mom," she whispered, "why did Dad take money out of my college fund?" I saw the bank statement. I froze. She wasn't supposed to know. But there it was. Another crack in Daniel's mask. The lies weren't just mine to expose anymore. They were unraveling on their own. The third ripple hit harder than the rest. Lila. She wasn't the devoted mistress he thought she was. The second she realized Daniel couldn't deliver on his promises, the house, the trips, the fantasy life, she flipped. She sent me an email. Subject line, "You deserve to know everything." And inside, screenshots of their private messages, voice recordings, even photos of them together. She threw him under the bus in one click. Maybe out of spite, maybe because she wanted revenge of her own. But whatever her reason, she handed me the final piece of ammunition I needed. That night, I watched Daniel pacing the living room, his phone buzzing nonstop. Colleagues angry, his partner threatening lawsuits, his mistress gone rogue. He looked smaller somehow, like the weight of his own lies was finally crushing him. And for the first time in years, I didn't feel powerless. I felt in control. Because the one truth Daniel could never accept was this. I didn't even need to destroy him. He was doing it all by himself. I used to think secrets were like shadows, hidden, quiet, only dangerous if you went looking for them. But with Daniel, his secrets weren't shadows anymore. They were floodlights, burning holes through every corner of his carefully built life. And eventually, the whole world had to see. It started at his company's quarterly board meeting. Normally, these were the highlight of Daniel's life. He loved standing at the head of the conference room table, flashing his perfect smile, talking about growth, vision, and future expansion. But this time was different. Michael had already gone to the board with the evidence: the misused company funds, the personal trips disguised as business expenses, the suspicious withdrawals. Everything he thought was buried was now in black and white, projected onto a giant screen. Daniel tried to explain. He used his charming voice, the same one that had fooled me for years. He laughed nervously, called it a misunderstanding, even tried to blame Michael for mismanaging the numbers. But the board wasn't buying it. One of the older members leaned back in his chair and said flatly, "Daniel, we're launching a formal investigation. Effective immediately, you're suspended." His face went pale. His kingdom, the business he'd worshipped more than his family, was slipping away. And that was just the beginning. At home, the tension had reached boiling point. The kids weren't speaking to him. My son refused to sit at the same dinner table. My daughter stopped calling him Dad and started calling him Daniel. Every silence at home was louder than any argument we'd ever had. Then came the final blow, the one I didn't plan, but fate delivered perfectly. One of Lila's emails leaked. I don't know how. Maybe she sent it to the wrong person. Maybe she did it on purpose. But within days, a local gossip blog had picked it up. Suddenly, everyone in our town knew. The respected businessman, the man who wore designer suits and talked about integrity, was exposed as a fraud and a cheater. The headline was brutal. Local CEO accused of fraud. Mistress leaks private messages. Daniel walked into the office the next morning, only to find whispers, stares, and phones snapping pictures. He called me from his car, his voice breaking. "They're saying things online. Lies. You have to believe me." But I didn't have to believe anything. The proof was out there now, for everyone to see. That evening, I stood by the window as he came home. No confident stride, no smug smirk. Just a man, shoulders slumped, tie loose, eyes hollow. And I realized something important. I hadn't even needed to expose him myself. Daniel had humiliated me in front of a crowd on Christmas. But now, the entire community was watching his humiliation play out in real time. And this time, there was no applause. Only silence. Daniel thought humiliation was the end. He thought being suspended from his company, whispered about in town, and caught between his family's silence was the lowest point of his life. He had no idea what was coming. Because for months, while he plotted my humiliation with those divorce papers, I had been quietly preparing my own arsenal. Every email, every receipt, every late-night call he thought I didn't hear. I wasn't just gathering evidence for a divorce lawyer. I was building the story of who Daniel really was. And now, it was time to let it all out. It started with the house. The same house he once bragged was proof of his success. He didn't know that my name was on every single property document. When he tried to move assets into Lila's name, I froze them. When he tried to sell one of the investment apartments under the table, my lawyer slapped him with an injunction so fast his head spun. "Everything you thought was yours," I told him, my voice steady. "Isn't. Not anymore." Then came the financials. He always loved to make me feel small when it came to money, lecturing me on investments, rolling his eyes if I asked questions. But what he didn't know was that I had been working with a forensic accountant. Every cent he misused from the company, traced. Every personal loan disguised as a business expense, documented. Every secret payment to Lila, highlighted and ready to present in court. When Daniel realized what I had, he looked at me as if I were a stranger. His voice shook. You planned this?" "No, Daniel. You planned my humiliation. I planned my survival. The real strike, though, was personal. I didn't need to scream or post his messages online. I simply invited his parents over one evening. They adored him, always saw him as the perfect son, the one who could do no wrong. They sat across from me in the living room, smiling politely, waiting for Daniel to come home. And then I showed them the files, the photos, the emails, the bank statements. His mother's hand went to her mouth. His father leaned forward, face pale, muttering, "My God!" When Daniel finally walked in, carrying his briefcase, he froze. He saw their faces, the papers spread across the coffee table, and he knew. He dropped the briefcase. "You told us she was exaggerating," his father said coldly. "You told us she was unstable." For the first time in his life, Daniel had no words. That night, he slept in a hotel. And for the first time in my life, I slept peacefully in my own bed, because the power wasn't his anymore. It was mine. And I wasn't finished. Because while Daniel's secrets had shattered his career and reputation, I still had one final move, the one that would end his carefully crafted image forever. Daniel still believed he could recover. That's the thing about men like him. They cling to the illusion of control even when everything around them is collapsing. Sure, his parents had turned on him. Sure, his company had placed him under review. Sure, his friends had started to distance themselves. But Daniel told himself he'd rebuild. He always had, right? What he didn't realize was that I still held the most powerful card of all, and I was ready to play it. It began with a single envelope, thick, heavy, sealed with the kind of precision that promised bad news. Inside were documents his board of directors could no longer ignore, proof that Daniel hadn't just cheated on his wife, but had funneled company money into secret accounts to cover his personal indulgences, vacations, jewelry, gifts for Lila, for even an apartment he'd been renting for their getaways. I didn't deliver it myself. I didn't need to. My lawyer made sure every board member received a copy. Within 48 hours, Daniel's career wasn't just under review. He was terminated, his name scrubbed from the company website, his access revoked. But I didn't stop there. Daniel had always boasted about being a pillar of the community, the kind of man everyone turned to for advice, donations, leadership. So I took the truth to the community. Not through scandalous gossip or online tirades, but through facts. At the town council meeting, I stood up with a calm smile and read, word for word, the summary of his financial manipulation. The gasps in the room weren't of shock that corruption existed, they were of shock that it came from him. He wasn't just a fallen man now, he was a public disgrace. And the final blow? It wasn't about money or property or even his career. It was about Lila. Daniel had risked everything for her, betrayed his marriage, drained his accounts, shattered his reputation. But when she saw the empire crumbling, she ran. Quietly, quickly, without a single goodbye. She took the apartment key, the credit cards, and vanished. He was left with nothing. No wife, no mistress, no career, no image. When I saw him for the last time in court, during the final hearing, he looked hollow. His suit hung loose on his shoulders, his hair unkempt, his eyes sunken. He didn't even glance at me as the judge read out the ruling. Assets divided in my favor, custody of the house secured, spousal support granted. It was over. And yet, I didn't feel triumphant. I didn't feel vengeful. I felt free. Because Daniel's downfall wasn't about revenge anymore. It was about truth, about finally breaking the mask he'd worn for years, and proving to him, to his family, to myself, that I was never the weak, naive woman he thought I was. The final blow wasn't destroying him. It was reclaiming me. The day the court case ended, I walked out of that courthouse lighter than I'd felt in years. No rings weighing down my hand, no secrets strangling my chest, no shadows looming over me. For the first time in over a decade, I wasn't Daniel's wife. I wasn't the quiet woman who smiled at dinner parties while pretending not to notice the lies. I wasn't the scapegoat for his failures, or the audience for his arrogance. I was me. The house, now mine, no longer felt haunted. I repainted the walls, tore down the curtains he'd chosen, and filled every room with colors that made me happy. Soft blues in the bedroom, sunny yellows in the kitchen. I even turned his old office, the room where he'd spent hours hiding calls from Lila, into a studio for painting. My brush became my therapy. Every stroke, a release. Every canvas, a piece of freedom. At first, people didn't know how to approach me. Neighbors looked at me with pity, with curiosity. Some whispered behind my back. But little by little, something shifted. Women I barely knew started coming to me quietly, telling me their own stories. Some had husbands who lied. Some had partners who belittled them. Some were still too scared to leave. I realized something powerful. My story wasn't just mine. It was a mirror for so many others who were silently suffering. So, I decided to share it, not out of spite, not to drag Daniel's name through the mud, but to show others that survival is possible, that reclaiming yourself is possible, that there is life after betrayal. I began writing, first in journals, then in blog posts. Soon, messages poured in. Women thanked me for giving them courage. One even told me she finally packed her bags after 20 years because she realized she wasn't alone. That one message alone made every painful step worth it. As for Daniel, he faded into the background. The man who once filled every corner of my life became just another name whispered in cautionary tales. I didn't stalk his social media. I didn't chase updates. He no longer held that power over me. And Lila? Rumor had it she resurfaced in another city, chasing another perfect life. I didn't care. They both belonged to my past now. The holidays, once painful, became beautiful again. That next Christmas, I invited my closest friends, lit candles, cooked a meal that filled the house with warmth. And when midnight struck, I looked around the room, not for him, not for what I'd lost, but for what I had built. A life, steady and true. My story had started with humiliation, but it ended with strength. Because the greatest revenge isn't ruining someone else's life. It's rebuilding your own, brighter than they ever imagined.